Good morning. Bonjour. I love this. It is so good to see and hear the buzz on our second day of the conference, our third mass gathering in this room since we began with the celebration on Wednesday evening. I cannot begin to tell you how exciting we are to feel the energy. It feels as if there is a renewed energy in our sector here in Ontario. We've had dynamic conversations with each other. We've learned, we've shared, we've laughed, we've cried, we've celebrated each other and our sector and the incredible work and the incredible impact and difference we're making in the lives of immigrant refugees, migrants, folks who are undocumented, and others who find themselves made vulnerable by our various social and economic systems. Welcome to day 2 of the OCASI conference. We have a fabulous panel to start off our day, but before I introduce the panel, just some housekeeping. Once again, a reminder, please pick up headsets. I believe the panel this morning is in English, but folks are free to engage in whichever one of the 2 official languages that you're comfortable in. So in order for us to be fully engaged with each other, if you don't speak both official languages, please pick up a headset. And remember to return them at the end of the day. Parking is free, so no need to register anywhere about it. We also have a quiet room. We know that while we are here with each other, there is so much happening around the world. Whether or not we're paying attention to what's happening in Palestine and Israel, whether or not we're thinking of the ongoing war in Ukraine, whether or not we're thinking of the civil unrest in Sudan or in Congo, we know that these are difficult conversations, and these are all communities that we work with and that many of us are from. And sometimes we just need to take a break, a pause, a quiet moment. So we've set up a space for prayer, for meditation, to draw, just to be with yourself in the Duncan room. It is out the door to your right and on the left side, and I think there's a sign that says Duncan room. We also know that there are difficult conversations happening in various groups in the hallways. And so if you're feeling a need to chat with someone just to have some support, we're asking you to text "I want to chat" to 416-627-9407. That's 416-627-9407. I believe that there are signs outside with the number on it. And then, of course, we try, in spite of the rain, to do a wellness walk with our dear colleague, Sajade Zarai from OCASI. Meet Sajade at 12:30 next to the registration table. I think today you'll be walking around the gardens. You know, rain is warm, it's a warm rain, it's okay to get a bit wet, bring an umbrella if you have one. It's great just to be outside and to breathe after spending so much time indoors. We also have a wonderful keynote speaker to open up our afternoon. Gabriel Alahuda will start at 1. In your program, it says 1:30. He will be starting at 1 p.m. And a surprise guest to end our conference this afternoon, beginning at 2:30, our Minister Mark Miller will be coming by to say hello to you and to share some of his thoughts with you at 2:30. So hope to see all of you here at 2:30. And then, of course, we're going to see who the lucky winner is for 50-50 draw. How many people have bought tickets? How many people have not bought tickets? Maggie and Victoria. Victoria, Maggie at the back. There's a race to see who can sell most tickets. Put up your hand again. How many people have not bought tickets? Lots of folks at the front. 1 for 5, 5 for 20. Someone goes home with 50% of it. So please stay and help support the United Way of Greater Toronto. For those of you who are new to the council, the United Way of Greater Toronto is our only core funder. They fund our advocacy and policy work. They fund this conference as an example so that we can support as many of you attending as possible. We also want to thank, in terms of conference support, our major funders, IRCC, Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada, as well as our Provincial Ministry of Labour and Immigration. So thank you, and it's now my great pleasure to introduce our plenary session this morning, Housing is a Human Right. It's starting. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you our moderator, Leila Sarangi. Leila is the Director of Social Action at Family Service Toronto and the National Director of Campaign 2000, a pan-Canadian movement working to end child and family poverty. With over 20 years of frontline research and policy experience, Leila has learned that the people experiencing systemic marginalization can be the furthest away from decision-making. Her professional experience demonstrates commitment to connecting lived reality with public policy, advocating with and engaging people in a meaningful way to inform policy and legislative changes. Leila's social action leadership and research experience spans a variety of issues, including gender equity, poverty elimination, housing and homelessness, gender-based violence, police accountability, and immigration. Please welcome our morning panel. Leila?
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Debbie. And it's so fantastic to be in this room with everybody. I want to thank you for your time today. We are going to be talking about housing as a human right and how organizations and yourselves can get involved in this advocacy work that is just so critical at this time. Without further ado, I have a very powerful panel, these incredible people doing work in this space to help us have this conversation. So first I'd like to invite up Ambalika Roy, who works as a senior community engagement advisor at the Canadian Centre for Housing Rights, which works to advance systemic policy changes to make sure that housing policies reflect the right to housing and a rights-based approach. Ambalika has coordinated the Right to Housing Toronto Network, a coalition of housing rights organizations and housing activists monitoring the 10-year rights-based housing plan in Toronto. Elizabeth McIsaac is the president of Matry, an organization committed to advancing systemic solutions to poverty through a human rights-based approach. In addition to building policy solutions and strengthening communities, she has led Matry to a deep focus on advancing the human right to adequate housing through strategic opportunities with cities and other orders of government. We also have MS Moriga, who is an executive with extensive experience in housing management and asset management, housing development, plus neighborhood and community renewal for municipal organizations such as the Toronto Community Housing and the Peel Housing Corporation. He is known as a leader with a vision, delivering at a strategic level by consistently reframing and creating innovative approaches to transforming organizations. Moriga is currently the Vice President at Wood Green Community Services. And last but never least is Alejandra Ruiz Varga, the Chair of the East York Chapter National Leadership Representative of ACORN Canada. Alejandra is a housing worker originally from Colombia who has been involved with ACORN since 2015. She has led meetings and actions on issues such as childcare, remittances, and employment insurance reform, but her passion and advocacy on affordable housing, tenant rights, and state of good repair are her passion issues. Welcome, everybody. Okay. Is this on? Can you hear me on this one? I did not turn that mic off. Okay, as long as folks can hear me, we're going to get started. We're going to get right into a discussion between the panels, and then I'm going to open it up to the floor for questions and answers. And I see that you've got mics, so once I see people start to line up, we'll take questions from the floor as well. So we want to have a very engaged discussion. And Ambalika, I'm going to start with you. The topic today is on housing as a human right. This was historically entrenched into legislation in 2019. Can you start us off with a bit of level setting and explain to us what the right to housing means?
Sure, Leila, thank you for the question, and I hope you all can hear me. Okay. Good morning, everyone. That's a great question to begin with, the panel, and such a powerful panel, I would say. So, as you rightly mentioned, that right to housing did come into Canada's within the commitment framework in 2019, but right to housing is a social and economic right, and it comes from the international law, and the Canada has committed to it even before 2019. 2019 is when federally we committed to right to housing. But before I begin what it means, let me also clarify that right to housing means that government does not need to provide everyone with a home immediately. I'm stressing on the word immediately, but must work towards achieving adequate housing for all people in Canada. So it has two parts to that. But it also means that housing costs should not threaten or compromise other basic needs or other human rights for people. For example, people should not have to choose between paying rent or putting food at their table. Right to housing also requires that everyone has a right to security of tenure, and what that means that everybody should have a legal protections against forced evictions, displacement, harassment, and other threats to their tenancies. And everyone should have an access to safe and well-maintained home. Again, that's a very important facet of right to housing, so that the occupants' life are not jeopardized, their health and safety is maintained. So that's another part. And their homes should be in a location which is near to their employment, near to their social connections, near to the transit, childcare facilities, and other social facilities that we need to have to kind of have an adequate living. We also know that historically disadvantaged groups should be prioritized when it comes to accessing adequate housing resources. So right to housing also follows the same principle. So by that I mean housing law and policies should consider special housing needs for groups who has got special needs for their housing, like elderly, seniors, children, racialized people, persons living with disabilities, and many others, so that everybody is able to age in place. That's a very important facet as well. So finally, I would say that housing must be culturally appropriate, and by that I mean that the way it's constructed, the building materials and other policies supporting this, things must be enable the expression of the cultural identity of all of us have. So that's very important, it to be culturally appropriate, that we all stay in a culturally appropriate housing. That's why in the context of Canada, we can say that that's the reason we need Indigenous-led housing for Indigenous communities. So that's just an example. So as Helena mentioned, that the federal government has recognized this right to housing by enacting a law that's called National Housing Strategy Act. I'm sure in the panel we will hear more about that, which has created mechanisms so that people can claim their right to housing, and where communities can actually realize what right to housing means. So I would say that to begin with.
That's great. Thank you so much, and actually leads quite nicely into what I wanted to ask Elizabeth. Maitree was a key player working with both government and community in achieving the National Housing Strategy Act. Has the passing of this legislation achieved what we hoped for? And where are we in terms of realizing the right to housing?
Well, I want to build from where Ambalika left off, which is it doesn't happen overnight. There's a key concept in the right to housing, which is progressive realization. It needs to keep moving forward. It can't retrogress. State parties like Canada has signed on to say if we recognize it as a right, we also accept that we have to keep this moving forward. We have to measure what we're doing, and we have to do better. So that's called the progressive realization of the right. So it doesn't happen overnight. Have we achieved what we hoped we would with the Act? Not even close. What passing that Act did was it put in place the rules for what Canada should do and what it can be held accountable for. So because it's in law, we can now challenge it. We can now say, you haven't done what you were supposed to do by the law. Part of what was also in the Act was setting up some accountability mechanisms that would mean that we could call them to account without having to go to court, per se. So they put in place something called the Federal Housing Advocate. And a woman was appointed about a year and a half ago, maybe it's 2 years, I don't know about anyone else, but in COVID I've lost track of time. But Marie-Josée Houlet is now the Federal Housing Advocate, and we have a fully built-out office federally that is looking at how well we're doing on the right to housing, that is calling the government to account. The other thing that was put in place because of the Act is something called the National Housing Council. And this was about 16 appointees from across the country, including people with lived experience of housing precarity and homelessness, including strong, in the first instance, Indigenous representation and various communities that are impacted by the right to housing. And they have also been convening, and they are right now delivering on the first, what's called housing review panel. And they're reviewing the issue of financialization of housing. They're having human rights hearings about how people have been impacted by the financialization of housing, which is a very complex term, but really means financialized actors, big financial actors buying buildings, real estate, and then making it more difficult for people to continue having what Ambalika described as affordable, secure, safe housing. So we have those mechanisms in play. So to your question, have we succeeded? We haven't succeeded in ensuring and protecting and fulfilling the right to housing of every person in Canada, but we have advanced our infrastructure, our architecture of being able to do that. What we know is that housing precarity is a systemic problem. It requires systemic change. Everyone in this room works on issues of systemic change. You know that it does not happen in a day, and it doesn't happen because of an act of legislation. It happens because communities demand it, communities work on it, and communities push it forward. So I think that what we have now are some of the tools to begin pushing this progressively forward. I think that we have a number of markers in the future that we need to be keeping track and saying, are we moving forward or are we moving backward? And that's where we need to keep watching, and that's the work ahead.
That's great. Thanks so much, Elizabeth. I think, and probably for people in the room as service providers, there is such a real tension between the crisis of people not having housing right now and trying so hard to find them the services and the adequate housing that they need and you know, as we're talking about, have a right to. There's a tension between that and the kind of longer-term systems change piece. So, Mariga, I'm interested from your perspective, as somebody in community services, as one of the municipality's largest nonprofit housing provider, how do you overcome that challenge? And can you talk specifically about some of the issues that immigrants, migrants, people without status face when they're trying to access housing, and what you and your organization have done to address that?
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Yeah. Before I sort of go into the question, I just want to say that I'm really excited to be invited back to an OCASI conference. I haven't been here for a while, which is probably my fault. As an immigrant myself, I spent a lot of time in the early part of my career working on immigrant issues and housing issues as well. Those early days were fights with landlords. I think there's still pictures of myself. Somebody sent me a picture of myself the other day, you know, at Flemington Park, challenging the landlords in and some of the substandard housing that immigrants were subjected to. And I suspect most of that probably still happens. So I just want to say I'm really privileged to be here. But I also want to say that as immigrants, and I will refer to myself as that, we have to come to this conversation with a lot of strength. Part of my portfolio is developing new housing. So I mix with a lot of developers and so on and so forth. And I can assure you that immigrants are at the core of the discussion about housing. And they are at the core of the discussion of housing in two ways. One, every developer who wants to justify changes, new benefits through that they can use to justify their projects says, we have more immigrants coming and we need you to do this, this, this. In the name of immigrants, I hear it all the time. So part of that for us, the challenge is to, like I said, occupy that space with strength, because we are the group of people that drive the demand. We are the core demand. But we also, it's a bit of a double knife, because I also hear conversations about immigrants when we go into issues about refugees that are not so glorious, as more in terms of being a barrier, being a load on the system. And that language, starts to stereotype refugees and immigrants in a way that all of us are not very receptive to. So I just want to say that we sit in that place. Now, at Wood Green, my work as Vice President of Housing and Homelessness is to make sure that we provide housing for those groups that, in the human rights conversation that we just started, special needs, hard to house, people who need support and initial help in order to break into the housing market. And so the biggest thing for us is, immigrants need housing in order to realize the opportunities and have a place so that they can take their kids to school, start integrating into the Canadian society, and eventually move into that home ownership or other forms of housing rentals that we have. So that's one area. The other area that we deal with is because of the trauma that refugees and other people who come to this country might have, we also provide a wraparound service for them in order to make sure that that part of their mental well-being is looked after. So at Wood Green, for example, we had special housing that we put together for refugees coming from Syria. We've continued to keep that quota of our housing as housing for immigrants and refugees that come with a lot of trauma. We also have housing that we use for our Homeward Bound program, which is for the most part made up, constituted of immigrant women who we support through a trajectory of 4 years with all the different services coddled into one. And at the end of 4 years, they graduate. I believe the graduation ceremony was yesterday, with a job, with a house. And what we're doing now is we take them through this 4 years of support with employment, daycare, and you can look it up in the website. But what we've also discovered is there's no point in supporting somebody through that process, and then at the end of 4 years you throw them back into the housing market, which is probably the most difficult housing market that we've ever experienced. We're in a really, really tough place now because the affordability for newcomers, just like ordinary Canadians who are low income, is an extremely difficult thing to bridge through even the benefits and social assistance dollars that we have. So what we've also started is to partner with developers, develop our own housing that is able to charge at the level of income that people can afford, even with startup jobs and so on and so forth. So we have a big partnership with Daniels Corporation at Regent Park, to provide that kind of housing. There's a whole bunch of new partnerships in that space that that we've been able to sort of begin to glean some for. The other piece that I'm involved in, that's a big part of my work and that I'm championing, is in the immigrant sector. We used to rely on a network of housing help organizations to try and get housing for immigrants. Well, that option is very, very limited now because the rents, as you know, have gone to just another level. So what we're trying to do is to say, hey, we're at the center of this conversation. Why can't we develop capacity within our own immigrant associations and organizations to become housing providers? Because you can either wait or you can be in the game. So, you know, without revealing where we're at in the negotiations, we're in a pretty strong and advanced level of conversations with CMHC, because it requires some flexibility on their part from their traditional programs to be able to work with an immigrant serving organization in Toronto. And we're well on our way to putting together something there. But it's also it's a model to say we need to challenge ourselves to go into that space as opposed to just what we occupied, which is the traditional relying on private landlords and other providers to do that for us, because this is the hardest housing situation. Notwithstanding the good architecture that we have, the next 6 years are going to be extremely difficult because we don't have the alignment of government at all three levels that is going to solve this problem. So we have to insert ourselves in there, and I keep repeating that, for us to be in the solution. In some crooked ways, there is a window there because the old traditional systems are not working, and it's up to us as immigrants to come and bring some of the new solutions. And I'm happy to speak a little bit more about that, but just also kudos for me in some of the work that the Black-led organizations, Black churches, have been doing around the refugee problem, which, as you saw, became a bit of a political football between the three levels of government. And so talk about barriers. Even those who are supposed to protect us are not necessarily, they turn us into a football, into a political football. So kudos to the churches and all the other immigrant organizations that are stepping in to support that part of the population. I've overspoken, but you asked me, so I've answered.
That was really, really great, Mariga. Yeah. And I heard some yeses and some nods when you were talking about entering into the space that the market is not actually meeting needs and is causing more problems. So that was really, really interesting. I want to just turn it over to Alejandra. You and I have known each other for a very, very long time. And seeing how you've been developing your voice into a powerful advocacy tool has been incredibly inspirational. Can you tell us about some of the work you're doing with Acorn, how you got involved in that, and why supporting people with lived and living expertise of poverty and housing precarity is really essential to this advocacy work that we're doing?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm super happy, and I never had a breakfast like that. Well, very good, thank you. And I really like the title that you had put, Resistance and Renewal, because we cannot stop. We cannot be quiet. This is the moment as social workers, as service providers, as a support people. This is the time that many people that don't have the voice needs us. This is the time where we need to get more creative and renew, and we need to be relentless. And another thing that I would like to say is that I totally despise when people say that the problem in Canada for housing is the immigrants. It's wrong. This is wrong. This is something that we had previous isn't it? Like probably people that know policies knows more exactly the time, but this has been something that Acorn, we have been witnesses. We have been here since 2004, and we have been witness this declining, isn't it? And we have been singing the same song. Sometimes we look like a broken record, but this is because we don't see changes. But even though, well, we see some changes, I can't tell you all our winnings. Maybe we don't have time today, but I can't tell you all our winnings. But the issue here is that many people are very concerned that how many, like few housing that we had, or that we need more housing. It's better to say it that way. But we can even build millions of housing, but at some time we're going to catch up again because we had a very poor legislation. We're still having a legislation like it's called vacancy decontrol, that if my friend moves, I don't know, you had a housing, you know how to disclose, it's an example, don't worry. So, so if he moves and I come in, what is going to happen is that the rent is going to be so high that probably I need to put my dog to work, isn't it? If you had a dog. So what I try to say is, well, we have been hearing and we know that the situation is very difficult, but it is even worse when we had no status and when we are new in the country. So it's very good what you are doing. And maybe you wonder how I can get involved when I am until here from work and I have the family, I have my life. Well, what about if you commit to go to organizations like ACOR, or organizations like Wood Green, or organizations like we know, at least one time a month and do something, isn't it? And do something to create more awareness, because believe it or not, I don't know, you hear people that say that we don't have issues in Canada, that we don't have poverty in Canada, that what are you talking about? So there is people that need to be educated. And one thing that is very important, why minorities or immigrants or people racialized or people that is vulnerable needs to be in these tables and needs to be out there saying, is because, well, we had a PhD in suffering, you know? We know exactly what is what we need, isn't it? We are looking for luxury. This is good and beautiful, but this is not what we are asking. ACOR and organizations like ACOR and us, we are asking for decent homes. It's only that. A place where we can go and we can rest, and a place where we can, when we call, nobody tell us, call another day, or you are so bothering me so much, and don't even do the things like the repairs and the pest control. So ACOR is an organization that fights for social change. I should start for that, but I get carried on. Sorry about it. And we work since 2004. Here we start in Weston, and now we are in 20 cities, and we had 9 offices across Canada. And speaking of what Elizabeth was saying, we're going to have an action, because we love actions. We like talk. Well, I like talking too, but we like actions. So we're going to be this Monday at 12:30 in San Andrew Station, because we want to go to that panel, to crush that panel, baby, you know? We're going to crush that panel. So you are invited, yes. If you want to come, it's only 1 hour, and we're going to bring 500 testimonials of people that have been affected by the financialization of housing, meaning that no repairs. So, and it's not only me, isn't it? We are like 160,000 people in ACOR that are across Canada. I only a voice, and you are a voice. You are a powerful voice, because when you speak about somebody who is in suffering, you are the voice, because this person probably cannot speak. So it's very important that we connect the dots, and we invite you, ACOR, to that day. So we're going to make a fast to Canadian Mortgage Housing Association, that are the ones who are hosting this panel. And we're going to say, yes, it's good that you now are open, but we are tired, sick and tired, you know, to be waiting. We need action. And this is why it's so important. Resistance and renewal. We resist and they renew. Thank you.
That was incredible, and that's why I said you have such a powerful voice and have really engaged us here. And there's so many things that I want to pick up on what you've just said, and I'm wondering which direction to go, and I might just ask both the questions and see what the panel does with it. But I want to pick up on, you talked about we're not asking for luxury, right? This is about about meeting people's basic needs, their fundamental human rights. When I just finished traveling across the country speaking to people in poverty, and when we ask, what does a poverty-free community look like to you? People are just talking about, I want to put food on my table for my kids and pay my rent and be able to access childcare and have good neighbors, right? This is how they're envisioning society. So how is this collective organizing? The other thing I loved about what you said, Alejandra, is that we're all really busy with our jobs and our lives, but if everybody contributed a couple of hours a month, a little thing a month, it builds together to something very powerful. So how is collective organizing important to, and why is it important to realizing the right to housing?
I can start with this, and maybe others can join too. And Alejandra, you have already set the stage that why we need action. We are sick and tired of promises. We now need action. So I would kind of begin with that. And collective advocacy and community organizations are very critical in bringing equitable changes for systems and structures that we are looking at. And that's exactly, I won't be as eloquent as Alejandra in speaking, why we need it and why there is so much of need of that collective advocacy. But lack of participation in decision-making process is one of the factors that increases the systemic housing issues. So that's one of the primary reasons I would say that we need to have our collective voices being heard. And some of the barriers that prevent people from participating meaningfully are lack of inclusion of the historically disadvantaged group, because we don't have the meaningful engagement tools with us accessible and in the manner that people would be able to use them. So that's definitely, there is a barrier there, and that's more of a reason that we need this collective voices being heard, so that the housing policies are inclusive, and so that we have a roof over our head, as we said, that we don't have to worry about whether we pay rent or whether we have food at the table. So bringing those issues together, it's very important. And I would also say, as Alejandra mentioned, that there are increasing in number of communities who are organizing to fight predatory landlords and fighting developments which is leading to exclusion and displacement. So that's a very, very important step. That's probably, it's been happening for a long time, but now it's getting more and more recognized. And, but of course, effective leadership, as we can see that what Alejandra is mentioning, that it's very important while we are planning those collective advocacies to make it more sustainable, make it more so that people are reached out properly, so that people are included there. So we need to plan those pieces very carefully, I would say, like that. And I don't know, one of the things that I can share is, since I used to coordinate the Right to Housing Toronto network, so that had a somewhat successful advocacy, and I'm very glad to say that both Econ and Maitri is here, who are part of that advocacy, even before I came into the picture about coordinating the network. So sharing some learning, it's very important when we are looking what opportune moment that we are looking at, when we are trying to garner public support, because an issue is not only inward, it has to be everybody feels that that's everybody's issues, like Alejandra mentioned that. So we need that public support. That's why we need more voices. We need to align with the political leaders. That's what Right to Housing TO did when we wanted to have a rights-based housing plan being adopted in Toronto in 2019. The vote was there at the council, but that vote got lost. So what people, the experts and advocates in the city, what they did, they got together. They wanted to know how they can ensure that the city adopts a human right to housing plan. So it was an important move because federal government by that time already recognized housing as a human right. So now it was turned for the municipalities to make sure that they have that in their plan. And so this group that I'm talking about, they found out that the city was about to start work on the 10-year housing plan. So they wanted to divert all their efforts so that influencing the process so that the city comes up with the rights-based plan. And by starting with the city staff, they build their capacity so that they understand what a rights-based framework look like. How would they be able to draft a municipal plan which has got human rights commitment in it? And as I mentioned, they also started gathering support from people because it's to make sure that it's not really a group of people who are saying this. They needed that. And finally, the city did adopt the plan, a rights-based housing plan in 2019. I mean, it was, I think, a year of advocacy, maybe more than that, but at least that active advocacy continued. But the group still exists, the coalition. So it's a coalition of housing rights organizations and advocates in Toronto, which ensures that the city's plans, city's decisions are based on human rights principles, and they are aligned with the right to housing plan that, like the rights-based plan that they have for 10 years, so that's what they do. So this is just like a story that was somewhat successful, but there's a lot of work to do still, so we are still continuing to monitor that. So I would say that voice needs to be, that public voice needs to be heard, and we have to look for that opportune moment, and all avenues of support is what we require when we talk about collective advocacy.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. Elizabeth, you talked about accountability mechanisms earlier and the review of the financialization on housing. It's the first review for this panel, right? So maybe can you talk a little bit about what it means for, and picking up on some of the pieces that Ambelika has talked about, what does it mean for civil society organizations and some of the work that Maitri has done to convene around this issue?
So before we started, you said that I could ignore your question.
That's right. I definitely did say that, so take it in any direction.
I'm not going to talk about what Maitri has done. I want to actually pick up on your question to Ambelika, which I think is really important. Like, it's about organizing communities. It's about mobilizing people to claim their rights. And I think of this in terms of our need to build a culture of human rights in Canada. And I think everything around us tells us that we don't have it. I think there's so many indicators in our lives, in what's happening in society and how we are responding to one another in the context of the global realities, and even before that, that there are things that we should be able to assume if we are a country that is embedded in human rights, and it's simply not there. And I don't need to convince anyone in this room of that. And so if we're moving toward building a culture of rights, it takes people organizing. It takes people understanding how their rights have been violated and how they can claim for it. And so for me, I think changing the culture of rights is twofold. One is you change what Mariga referred to, what I was talking about, is the architecture. What are the accountability structures? What are the laws? What are those pieces that are in place? And that's important. And it's a little more mundane when I listen to Alejandra talk about mobilizing people. But I think we need it, and I think it's important. And so that's where a lot of our energy has gone. But as a funder, we have also worked really carefully to partner with and support communities of rights holders to organize, to claim those rights, because they can bring forward that culture of rights in a very powerful way. And we've heard some of that. We hear it in the urgency of when Mariga says, we just need to go out there and build for ourselves and make this happen. We need to organize for that and make it happen. We hear it from Alejandra when she talks about saying, here's our moment, financialization of housing, let's deliver, let's show up and deliver to CMHC how rights have been violated and what needs to change. And by the way, here are the answers. We know what the answers are. And so for me, it's that twofold. It's both things are needed for the system's change. You need to change the rules of the game, and you need to strengthen the voices and the answers and the ideas. And people need to claim their power and take it and find the answers and bring them forward and begin building toward those. I'm using housing metaphors, architecture, building. I'll stop. But I don't want to take up any more space.
No, that's fantastic. And that architecture, folks, activists, advocates like Mariga, like Alejandra can leverage that architecture that gets built. So we need players at all ends of that, or along that whole spectrum working together. Mariga, I'm mindful that, you know, as nonprofit organizations, they can often be at different places in terms of the risk they want to take. And sometimes it's because boards are more risk averse. Sometimes it's because, you know, organizations are really focused on dealing with the immediate crisis at hand. Sometimes it's because we're governed by certain charitable rules and we have maybe some limitations on the kind of advocacy work we do. How have you addressed some of these challenges? As a senior administrator of a nonprofit organization, how have you kind of gone headfirst into some of these things and overcome what can sometimes stop nonprofits from engaging? Or you can answer a different question.
That's option number 2.
Yeah.
My boss is not here, so maybe I can. Anyway, just on the previous, and I'll come back to that. I just, and I maybe it'll answer your question too. Just on the issue of, I mean, like I said earlier, we've been very passive as immigrants in the space around housing because the market, for the most part, is supposed to respond to our needs. And we're saying we need to occupy that space differently. One of the things that I do is I'm the chair for the Homeless Connect at Toronto. This is an organization that has various events that mobilize homeless people. The biggest one is actually this weekend on Sunday at the Maple Leaf Garden. We have about 1,000 homeless people that come. And at that event, we have service providers. So we're doing advocacy and connecting about 1,000 or so. For the last 10 years, we've had easily 1,000 people come. And so we connect them with all kinds of services at that level. But we also get the biggest publicity that we ever get, that you can get for homelessness through the media throughout the day. And if you switch on your CP24s and so on. So, and that's a way of bringing the consumer to the front of people's screens, to the front of service providers, to make sure that they understand. This year we're excited about that event because we know that about half the number of the people who will be coming will be the displaced refugees. Some of them, in fact, heeded our call to be volunteers for the event. So we had to give them T-shirts for volunteers so that they help other people to navigate through the system. And then we said, but at any time when you get to a place where you think that particular place is meeting your own needs, all you have to do is take off your volunteer T-shirt and go and get service yourself. And it's going to be a very interesting thing. So creating a signature moment because we're busy doing so many things, and doing it together around some of these issues, I think is a very, very powerful way of doing it. And I'm happy to sort of talk about how we organize that. But speaking about the nonprofits and this, the nonprofit sector in the housing space was, again, like most other entities, a recipient of government programs that created nonprofit, a fairly robust nonprofit sector. Maybe it could have been more. In the 80s, that stopped, so we've stagnated. We used to be about 10% of the market. We're down to 5%, and the way things are going, we're going to be less than that in terms of providing housing for the most needy. So what do I do? What is it? And you asked about what we do. Or, most of the nonprofits are still trying to figure it out. But what we've done at Wood Green, and which is what I want to be able to connect after this about, is I don't want to use attack, but hold developers to their word. Because if they say that immigrants are the primary demand that carries their industry, so then how do we make them an ally? So that when we look at the walls for this conference, they are some of the sponsors easily. That was one of the first things. But the other thing that we're also doing is we're saying The City of Toronto, for example, is putting in a proposal for about 1,000 units of housing at the old Bay Street, the old Greyhound station on Bay Street. So we go to them and we say, as a non-profit, for you to meet your affordability, we want control of that 30% that is the requirement of it. Now, in order for us to deliver that, we need to be able to connect with immigrant organizations so that that becomes an intentional supply way of supplying housing to our tenants. We control the affordability piece, and they can deal with the other part of the market issues, which Alejandro said is, extremely volatile. Rents are increasing all the time. So that's the kind of permission that some of us are giving ourselves and stepping into that. And, coming here and talking about it makes me feel good because I can say, this is a place that I can build allies around that. And just being bold about it because, the city, the one good thing about policy is it has required all of them to meet a certain affordability. What you can't allow them to do is to define how they are going to deliver that. So for us nonprofits is to be able to step into that non-traditional place. And like I said, I belong to one of the bigger developers association in the city of Toronto, in the GTA, and being able to approach an organization like that as OCASI and saying, what are you doing for our members now that you all say that you're in it for the immigrants, kind of thing. Yeah. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much. Before I go and ask my next question for Alejandra, I do want to invite any questions from the floor in the IRL room. Also, I know that there is a virtual room, which I can't see, but if there's questions, I'm sure someone will flag me. And Alejandra, maybe you want to just, before I turn it to the floor, is there anything that you want to add around? Because ACORN really is like grassroots organizing, connecting the local across municipalities, across the country. It's such a great structure. Is there anything that you can share around how ACORN does its work and how they engage to build this movement?
Sure, thank you. So before to go to that, I would like to say that linking in what you say is that we as well, we need to protect what is already affordable. And it's coming back that with one unit that is built, we are losing 15. So this is very problematic because it's not only building, it's not only doing what organizations like Will Green is doing, but we need to protect. So now to link for what your question is that what we did in Westminster in BC is that we create a renovations and demolitions program or by law where, let's say, I move because they're going to renovate the place or demolish the place, and the landlord is obligated to pay to top it out the rent. Let's say I was paying $1,000 and the rent now is $2,000. The landlord needs to pay $1,000 in top of what I was paying, well, to house me. And then I had the first right of refusal to come back to the same building with the same amount that I was paying. We want that, and we really pushed for that, and we have been pushing this here in Toronto. Thank you. Yes, it's a big win, and this creates hope, and this creates a tool where we feel that we really exist, because sometimes we feel invisible as a people. As a person, we feel invisible when we try to knock doors, and we had to work for 3 jobs, like I was mentioned. So this is what we're trying to implement it here in Toronto. It's in some places. We have been seen some winnings, but we want it to be to the whole city. Of course, the province, as you know, is not a friendly province, unfortunately. And we have been knocking at the doors saying we need this without no too much success. But again, we cannot stop. We cannot get back. And we need to go continuously to tell the same story. So what we have done that is very important is, first of all, to know what is the issue. Because if I say that the issue is new shoes, but really the issue is new skirt, for an example like that, we're not going to nowhere. So we need to really know the issue of the community. When we know the issue of the community, and how we know the issue of the community, knocking at the doors of buildings, knocking at the doors of the community, and then the community will tell us what is what they need. And when we get a consensus, so we normally write a plan, or we plan and organize. And we had done actions, and specifically in the person or the target that we call, numerous times with politicians, with the Ministry of Housing, with Dot Ford. I don't know if you knew, but one time we went to his house at 6 o'clock in the morning. And we were there, and it's effective. It's effective because then he knew us. Now he knows Acorn because we were there, and he's like, oh, why you guys not go to Parliament? And like, well, because you never answered to us. So we thought that we coming to your house, it will be a good idea. So the neighbors are like, oh, get out of here. Why you not go to Parliament? Other neighbors are like, so you had, so it's fun. I'm telling you, this is fun. Well, what is not fun is when they say no, but it's fun because we know that what we are doing is right. And we need to keep doing it. So other things that we had done is to go to the ministry and 77 Bay, speaking about Toronto. Of course, we have been going to Ottawa, banks. We have been going to the banks too, because even though this is not for today, but the banks charge a lot of money. So, and this is why we are in a mess too. Anyway, this is not for today. We can talk later if you want. But then we have been going in Montreal too as well. And unfortunately, it's everywhere. Oh, in Hamilton, of course, in the Peel area. And it's the same thing. It's like the landlords speak the same language. They are very well organized without being organized, because what it moves then is money. But they are messing up with us life. This is more important. We say profit is more important than life. And this is why we need to keep fighting. Other thing that we do is we go into landlords, and this has been very effective to the offices or to the buildings. And we say that we need this and this ABC, like better elevators, better cleaning, better pest control, whatever it is that the people is needed. And we see right away. We have been seeing 90%, I will say. It will be good to have the stats. But I will say in my experience, 90% the landlords has changed. So what why I'm telling you that? Because it works. All the panelists are saying, yes, it takes time. Yes, it takes time. But when it works, it works. So again, don't dismay, and we keep doing it. Keep doing what you do, because what we're doing is good and great.
Thank you so much. And I know you've brought some of your municipal platforms with you, so if folks can look at it online, but you can also speak with Alejandra and get some of the documents that she has there. And I do see, thank you for waiting, but I'd like to turn it over to the question from the floor. We have about 10 minutes, so maybe just introduce yourself very quickly and your question.
Absolutely. Janet Madume, Welland Heritage Council and Multicultural Center, right from Niagara region. Over the last year, we've seen a huge influx of asylum seekers in our community. We're actually the lead of that project. My question to the panel, again, thank you, great presentations. How do we, as small to mid-sized communities, leverage everything we've spoken about this morning so we can tabulate and also grow and ensure these individuals are staying in our communities in terms of affordable housing? Housing is available, but it's just not affordable. Thank you.
Thank you. That is a great question, taking it out of the big city context and into the provincial context, which is very diverse and unique in smaller regions and rural areas as well. Who would like to take the question?
Yeah, I think the my line of my line of response, which is kind of where I've settled now, is I've looked around, and the old ways of providing housing, including in the nonprofit sector, have sort of reached a place where it's hard for them to make solutions in this much more difficult context. So what I started to speak about earlier is within your organization, small as you are, is to look at yourself and say, how do we sort of step into being in the solution mode in this space? And then secondly, who are the allies locally that we can work with? I gave an example of some of the work that we're doing with developers. We're also doing something else within the neighborhood, where if a developer is building, we approach them and we say, how much of this are you going to dedicate? So we're doing some work at the Bloor Bathurst area with the Blackhurst Community Center, formerly another bookstore, and we've been able to negotiate in that big development a set of units, I believe about 15, and we want to get more, in which we, as the Blackhurst Community Center, provide for our clients. And those kinds of models, I think, are some of the ways in smaller communities you can begin to sort of step into it and advocate for that solution, because there isn't any traditional infrastructure that's going to do that for you. But what we need is we need to look at our own organizations and say, we're going to dedicate a good part of our time in the solution side. We do a really good job when people are in crisis and find them temporary places to stay. But sometimes we stay there and we forget to look at the long term, how are we going to be part of the answer? And it's a bit of a mindset change. And then you get organizations like Woodgreen. We're happy to step in and augment your capacity in providing those kinds of things. And we found when you do it that way, there's a lot of good developers out there that will work with you in doing that. So, yeah, that's my answer to that.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Elizabeth.
I think building on what Marika said, so there's working with developers and those kinds of stakeholders that are ready to partner and help build out those answers. I think you also need to find ways of working closely with the municipalities or the regional municipalities. Cities or municipalities, doesn't have to be a big city, but they have responsibility for so many of these issues about retaining people in their community, about building out what their city or town or regional municipality looks like. And they have an ability to negotiate differently with the province and with the feds and bring dollars, capital, other things to that community. But they need to be pushed. They're not necessarily, they're not as bold as they need to be. We've heard bold thrown about here and there. Cities, municipalities need to be bold in their vision, and I think that community organizations that work directly with immigrants, with refugees, can help them build their vision. Ambalika described the way that Right to Housing TO helped build the City of Toronto's vision in their plan and hardwired human rights into that plan and into a new charter. And so then they can hold the city to account for it. I think in the same way, working with the city to identify we need more housing benefit allowances to keep people because the current rates are unaffordable. So if you want people to stay, they actually need a supplement, and you can help make that happen. Or they're at risk of eviction. Do you have an eviction prevention program? Do you have a tenant's right program so that people feel safe and secure where they are and are able to remain? So I think exploring the relationship that you have with the municipality, finding champions both political and bureaucratic. There might be a counselor that is the ideal, person to help carry that message and encourage the city to be more bold. But then also there's sometimes bureaucrats hidden that have been working on this stuff for years, and they can help navigate where your solutions can be brought forward. So I think finding those partnerships are a key way of figuring out what that bold vision locally can be, and then how to make it happen. And it's with developers, it's with municipalities, it might also be with the local college or university. There's other anchor institutions that can be partners with you in building this out. It might even be a hospital. In Toronto, our hospitals are doing amazing stuff around building out solutions for homelessness. So think about the anchor institutions in your community and how you bring them into your vision of successful settlement and integration of immigrants and refugees. Be my.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Are there any questions from the virtual room? We've got a couple of minutes left. No? Okay. And I don't see any more questions from the floor. So in the last couple of, oh, we've got one. Okay, great.
Darcy McCallum, Social Enterprise for Canada. I'm a settler. I recognize Canada's first sin was displacement. We continue to do that. I came into this session, if I can just say it, I often feel despair around the housing issue, and I feel that you've given me hope today. You've given me ideas, and I really, really appreciate that. My previous job, I watched as Metrolinx came into Thorncliffe Park and Flemington Park, decided that we were going to do gentrification without representation. And you put the Eglinton line in, and suddenly Flemington is being, affordable housing is being eroded, and people are, Moringa, you've been in the places. And then in Thorncliffe Park, I remember sitting on a call. There was like 600 residents on a call with Metrolinx, and they weren't even allowed to speak into the call as they were making plans to put the rail yard into the community and displace essential services like local culturally relevant grocery stores. And you have then you have seniors living in apartments where they used to have their families with them, but like 3-bedroom apartments, and they would gladly move to a 1-bedroom apartment, but they can't afford the move even within the same building. I don't even know what my question is, except that I think what was gripping me was the issue of financialization. Because it almost gets to money policy, and I love the work of Maytree, and I love the idea of Acorn and Moringa, what you guys are doing, and the City of Toronto piece. Gosh, let's get some hope. Let's build on this. Let's find ways that we can get involved. Because up until today, I don't think I saw a way that our agency could get involved with our little budget. But now I'm starting to say maybe there is a way, and I guess I wanted to say thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that. I think that was probably a better way to wrap up than I would have wrapped up the panel. So I really do appreciate that. And I know that we're at the end of our time. I feel inspired by the work that's happening here. I'm glad that it resonates with people in the audience, and hopefully for others who haven't shared yet as well. There are so many ways to get involved, and I think that's one of the things I heard really clearly coming from the panel is that collective advocacy piece, that coming together, that bridging and building partnerships, both with people we know, but also with some of these unusual allies. So to keeping that open mind and being open about where we can find relationships, leverage each other's resources, because individually we are a very under-resourced sector, but when we come together, we can find the strength and we can find those moments of wins, whether they're the big wins like Alejandra is talking about, or some of the smaller ones that give us hope. I want to thank each of you for your ongoing commitment to making housing an actual right that can be realized. You've been dedicated to this work for decades, and I really, and years, and decades. It is an ongoing project, but yes, easy. I know I don't want to age anybody, but thank you for your work. Thank you to OCASI for hosting this panel, and thank you to each of you for the work that you do every day.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. What is that? So nice. Thank you.
Once again for our panel. Isn't this a wonderful way to start the day? The energy, the information, the hope. Thank you so much. Now we have a 15-minute break. Your concurrent sessions will begin right at 10:30. For those of you coming out to hang, you can come and ask me anything you want, within reason, and then see you at lunch. I don't know why I do this actually.
Annually, right?
Yeah, this is the front line. This is the first time.